Good evening and many thanks for joining us on The Big Story tonight. My name is Sharon Momanyi. Now tonight, taxpayers could be in for a rude shock if proposals to increase the pension of members of parliament is adopted as is. In the proposal drafted last year, MPs who lost their seat last year and had served for only one term could get a one-off payment of 18.8 million shillings each in lieu of pension. This will increase the parliament pension for the year 2018-2019 by over 3.6 billion shillings. This comes at a time when the Salaries and Remuneration Commission has no commissioners after the term of inaugural ones ended last year. According to the Budget Committee Chair Kimani Ichgung'wa, the Parliamentary Service Commission chaired by Speaker Justin Muturi is yet to appear before the Budget Committee to explain the spike in members' pension. Ichgung'wa also explains that members have not been added any money and that all that there is now are mere proposals. But going with past experiences, members of parliament have always had their way when raising their pay. An attempt by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission to cap MPs' salaries and strike out plenary allowances last year is being contested in court and will be heard next week. Now, when SRC made that proposal to cap the MP's pay at 621,000, down from 710,000 shillings, President Uhuru Kenyatta then lauded the move, saying that he would not sign a bill in the contrary. Here is what the president had to say back in August 2017.
Fully support the recommendations of Sarah Sarem that have cut the salaries of all public officers, from the president all the way down. I ask these honorable, if they require to be called honorable members, to respect that.
Well, it seems that after 9 months, the MPs have decided to let bygones be bygones, or have they? Tonight in studio for this conversation, I have governance consultant Brian Muturi and Suba Churchill, the presiding convener of Civil Society Reference Group. Dr. Ekuru Aukot of Third Way Alliance is also joining us live from Milimani here in Nairobi. But before we hear from the gentlemen, our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, earlier in the day had a sit-down with a development economist, Anzet Sewere. Here now is that interview.
Kenya's wage bill continues to be worrying, but the people who should be helping rationalize and come up with ways and legislation to see that this does not make ordinary Kenyans continue to suffer, unfortunately, at the forefront of making the situation worse. The lawmakers, the legislators, whether it's increase in pay parks or retirement packages. And Zenzawera, who's a development economist, joins me now to talk more about this. And it's a worrying situation. And for you, you have an understanding, a broad understanding of what this means. Where do we stand as Kenyans in as far as the money we're making as a country, our spending, our debt, but also how our MPs want to be remunerated?
I mean, it's interesting that this is coming at a time when Kenya's fiscal path has been brought to light internationally around how sustainable is our fiscal path. Is our spending sustainable, and are we able to service all the spending that we're getting into? Of course, Kenyans, we've had conversations around our debt levels. So there seems to be indication that the government wants to start addressing the fiscal path that we're on and starting to get a handle on our debt. So it's very interesting that as a country, we're becoming very sensitive to our spending, what we're spending on, the debt we're getting into, that this move comes in where, you know, MPs want this massive increase in terms of the benefits that they'll get in terms of pensions. So it's a very interesting revelation of the disconnect going on there. On one hand, the country is having a conversation around how do we use our resources more efficiently, and then on the other hand, we have MPs saying we want to increase what we get.
Because there are those who argue that on one hand, for the MPs, it's a contract between them and the electorate. They're given 5 years in office. After that, it's up to the voters to decide whether or not they want. But now with this, it means if voters choose to not vote one back into office, then they pay them for that. We don't see that in normal business practice, do we?
Well, I think the whole issue is a problem. Of course, the whole issue of getting money when you're not in office is a question that should be addressed. But let us just begin from the beginning, whereas the amount of money that MPs get per month is exorbitant as it is. For a relatively low-income country that is struggling with poverty, poverty stands at 36%, MPs get over $500,000 a month. And if you look at our GDP per capita, that's about 166,000 a year. So we're already in a situation where I am of the view they're being overpaid.
Yes.
And yet here they are saying that they want more. So really, one of the biggest problems from an economic point of view that this move is really concerning is that it's not economically productive spending. When you look at the way government spends money, there's recurrent spending, which is sort of the bills that you have to pay to keep government running. Right. Wages are among them. Then there's development spending, which is more economically productive development, hopefully develops the economy, leads to GDP growth, and allows government to collect more revenue. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the type of spending that the MPs want the government to foster, it's not economically productive. So again, we ask ourselves, from an expenditure point of view, is this a smart move? And the answer is a loud no.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, political will is the big one. We've had the president address this, talk about the wage bill being a significant problem, half of our revenue going to pay 2% of salaries of the public service. But yet we don't see that trickle down into action. So is it just speaking to what people want to hear, but no actions to actually see that there's that kind of rationalization?
Well, I think when you're in a context where people have the power to change legislation to suit their demands, then it becomes a bit limited in terms of what can actually be done to control them. Right. Because this is really, I think, almost a moral problem around how these sorts of demands are being made, given where Kenya is in a fiscal position, given the tough year that we had last year because of the drought, because of the elections, and that we're really trying to recover as an economy and get money into people's pockets. And then here comes this sort of very ludicrous demand and, in my view, an immoral demand. Yeah. But I think it's just a reflection, as I said, of the disconnect where public office has become synonymous with wealth generation. Mm-hmm. And where I think we're in a situation where public office is not synonymous with service and helping and assisting, and it's more about accrual of wealth and trying to get what you can while you're there. Yeah. And while that logic continues, I think we'll continue to attract people that perhaps don't have the best intentions of Kenyans at heart as they run for those positions.
Because we also have on one hand the lawmakers arguing at the end of the day they get this money, but there's so many demands financially from the constituents members. They're asking them for money for school fees, for this and the other. So they justify the need to have this money and this kind of paycheck because at the end of the day, everyone wants something from them and they need a source, which is the money we get to give them.
Well, I think that's a weak argument because if you look at the structure of the Kenyan economy, we are an economy that does not have a welfare state in that if you're unemployed, you generally are on your own. And so you'll find that a lot of, even middle income, low middle income and even upper income Kenyans really put a portion of their money to support their loved ones who are in need. So we all pay that school fees, that funeral expense, that wedding, whatever it is, that unemployed auntie or uncle or cousin who's in the village, and you give them, the 10,000 or 5,000 or 2,000 a month that you can borrow. So I think the reality is that because we don't have a welfare state, the reality is that Kenyans are the welfare state. We give what we can, when we can, to whomever we can to help them get through the month. So that logic from MPs is not a unique situation that they're in. This is a reality that we all deal with as Kenyans, that part of our paychecks goes to the people we love. Yeah. So that, I think, is sort of misguiding Kenyans on the pressures that they face. Yes, because they're in public office, they may get more pressures, but the reality is that these are negotiations we make as Kenyans every day in terms of how we spend our money.
Right. And then there's the whole economy in general. Where do we stand? What's the state of Kenya's economy? You had the president in the State of the Nation address his priority areas now in his second and final term. But our debt, now you have the wage bill, you have development that is wanting devolution with its demands for more money going down, but government saying they're doing best they can. Can you paint for us a picture?
Well, I think we're in a much stronger position this year than we were last year. I think last year we were hit by the drought. We were hit by, obviously, the prolonged electioneering period, and we continue to feel the effects of the interest rate cap and the contraction in credit. So I think this year we're in a much stronger position in that a lot of investors are coming in, private sector confidence is increased, and a lot of work is beginning to get going on in the economy for the next 5 years to try and make progress. So in that sense, we're good. Right. But one of our structural problems as an economy is that we're services-driven. Our manufacturing sector is still very low, and that's why we're having problems around employment and generating jobs. And I think the Big Four is really trying to gear towards creating jobs and taking care of Kenyans. How that plays out really depends on how that's implemented. Yeah. So I think there is optimism for this year, and I think growth will be much stronger than we saw last year. But there are structural problems that we have to address in terms of how our economy sits, what drives the economic growth, and the strategies we need to do to strengthen that. So these are the sorts of issues that legislators should be trying to get policy and law to address these issues, but instead they're busy figuring out what they can get while they're in office. And that really makes me saddened, because if you look at where we are as a country, we really need everybody on board to drive this country forward. Government will do its part, private sector will do its part, Kenyans will do its part, but we all have to be committed to creating a better Kenya. Mm-hmm. And that's why when we see this sort of action from MPs, it gives a signal that perhaps their minds are not in the right space.
Yeah, their priorities are different. Final question, 5 years of devolution, a lot of what county governments are still grappling with is to harmonize the workforce, because what they inherited and now the devolved counties with the staff they've brought in, the wage being even at that level has been a struggle. We heard the governor of Nairobi County talk about early voluntary retirement for the officials in Nairobi County to try and deal with that issue. Is that the best way to go? Or what are some of the ways the counties and the national government can look at easing out, because they know firing people is a risk, is suicidal in politics. So how best economically can they handle that? Because then it's killing on one hand, but it's unnecessary evil, isn't it?
Well, I think the reality is they'll get a lot of pushback if they try and do retrenchment and try to fire people. Mm-hmm. I think in a context where jobs are rare, they'll get a lot of pushback in terms of people arguing that they should be retained and all of that. So I think that needs to be a very detailed conversation at county level between national and county government to figure out what they can do. That said, if those cut-downs cannot be happened and cannot go to the extent that we wish to, we have to control the wage bill. We've got to limit the increments people are getting. We've got to limit the benefits. We've got to limit the allowances. We have really got to get that spending as small as possible. Mm-hmm. So again, this move is against that. It's against the sort of intent to control spending and try and get Kenya on a more fiscally sustainable path. So again, it's just a reflection of that disconnect. And I think part of the worry that I'm having is that what does this tell our young people around when you get in office, do what you want, get what you can, make the money, and then leave. When really what we should be telling our young people is that when you get into office, you should be serving the country. You should be seeking to develop and push and improve the status of your people. Right. So again, I think the message that they're sending is wrong.
Is wrong. Thank you. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. Sharon, back to you.
Right, our lead reporter there, Sophia Wanuna, talking to Anzet Sewere, who is a development economist, on this issue. And just to give you perspective, we want to just now take a look at the numbers and how the MP's proposed pension compares with other civil servants. If you can just have those figures up on our screen. And for the financial year of 2017-2018, this stood at 71.8 billion shillings, and it's bound to go up. Remember that the Budget Committee Chair, Kimani Ichgung'wa, insisting that this is still a proposal, that the Public Service Commission has yet to present this before the committee. And so if this goes to pass, it will go up from 71.8 billion shillings to 86 billion shillings, up 15 billion shillings. This is for, beg your pardon, for the civil servants' pension. And if we take a look at how that was for the members of parliament, for the financial year 2017-2018, this stood at 262 million shillings, and for the financial year 2018-2019 would go up 1.7 billion shillings. And you remember this would be a total increment of about 707% in terms of that increment in pension. And just to look at that gratuity for one-term members of parliament, the numbers of members of parliament who are entitled to this gratuity would be 196 members of parliament who were sent home, after that election last year. And the total amount then that would be paid to this 196 members of parliament would be 2.85 billion shillings. And the gratuity that each ex-member of parliament takes home 18.8 million shillings. Remember, this is after that motion that was passed in Parliament last year to increase this gratuity for members of Parliament, even after their first term. And this is what really has elicited a lot of displeasure from members of, the public. And right now, I want to have that conversation here in studio with the guests that are joining me. And I want to introduce them to you now. Joining me here in studio, we have governance consultant Brian Muturi and Suba Churchill, who is the presiding convener of Civil Society Reference Group. I'm also joined by Dr. Ekuru Aukot of the Third Way Alliance, who's joining us from Milimani here in Nairobi. Many thanks, gentlemen, for joining us to have this all-important conversation tonight. And I want to begin with you, Dr. Aukot. Not so long ago, you were running that campaign, for Punguza Mzigo to try and reduce the number of legislators in Parliament. And now we have this proposal. What do you make of it?
Thanks, Sharon. First of all, this proposal is very outrageous, and it speaks to the very campaign that we are trying to encourage Kenyans to endorse, which is Punguza Mzigo, Reduce Parliament. I think let's talk about figures. The 196 members of Parliament who were fired last year after they failed to regain their seats will take home about 3.6 billion Kenya shillings with the 18.5 million that they are adding themselves into. Now, at the end of these 5 years, if the 416 members of Parliament will probably take home another 7.6 billion Kenya shillings. Cumulatively, the members of Parliament currently, 416 plus the 196, will take home about 11 point something billion Kenya shillings. It's precisely for this reason that we are saying Kenya cannot afford this wage bill. This is too much, and we think that we are overrepresented. Parliament is not a place for people to go and seek employment, to seek enrichment. This is a contract of service. If you're actually fired after 5 years for failing to represent, for failing to oversight, this is not pensionable. It's not a permanent and pensionable position. So our view is that this is immoral to begin with. This is really killing the taxpayers in this country, and we honestly need to relook more urgently on the wage bill. Right. And it's precisely for this reason that Third Way Alliance Kenya has put a motion before Kenyans that it is time to actually reduce Parliament so that we can punguza mizigo and reduce the wage bill of running Parliament.
Right.
Currently, we are running our Parliament at a cost of 32 billion Kenya shillings annually. So in the next 5 years, we are looking into 150 billion Kenya shillings just to run Parliament. What Third Way Alliance Kenya is proposing is that to reduce Parliament, to have a maximum of 194 elected members of Parliament, then we reduce that cost of running Parliament to 5 billion annually. And then that way, we are also able to actually have serious men and women go into Parliament to ensure that they do legislation, they oversight government, and they represent the constituencies where they come from.
Right. And Mr. Churchill, from that conversation that our reporter Sophia Wanuna was having with Anzetse Were, who's a development economist, she speaks about how this is actually a contractual arrangement that, the members of Parliament have with those that they represent. It's a 5-year contract during which they're actually paid salaries and benefits and all that. Should this even lead us to the very conversation of what is the pension for in the first place after your contract has ended?
I think it is unacceptable that our members of Parliament are thinking of increasing their pension by over 700%. At a time when government has said time and again and is unable to pay lecturers. We know that lecturers have been on strike. We know that just a few months ago, nurses went on a 6-month strike. We know that the doctors have been on strike for lack of better terms of service. And I think it does not matter how many members of Parliament there are.